The desert is quiet in a way that almost feels intentional. A stillness so complete, so utterly consuming, that one begins to question whether sound itself has been muted by some ancient force. The Peruvian sun hangs heavy and unfiltered over the expanse of ochre sand and pale earth, baking everything beneath it into a crust of unchanging dryness. A faint wind passes through, lifting grains of dust that dance for a moment before settling again, as if unwilling to disrupt the eternal calm of the plateau. And then, as if summoned by a shift in perception, the emptiness reveals a secret woven into its very surface. Massive shapes, enormous lines, sweeping arcs, and perfectly straight paths carved into the skin of the desert. They appear so gradually, so subtly, that the mind struggles to grasp the scale. Only by rising above the ground can the truth be seen.
The Nazca Lines are not mere scratches in the earth. They are messages drawn across miles of desert, messages crafted by hands that vanished more than a millennium ago. For centuries, these mysterious geoglyphs remained hidden from human understanding. Travelers passed over them, walked across them, camped on them, completely unaware that beneath their feet lay shapes so massive they could only be fully perceived from the sky. And that in itself is a mystery. Why would people who never possessed the ability to fly create artwork visible only from above? What purpose could it serve? And more importantly, what were they trying to say? As early morning light stretches across the Nazca Plains, shadows cling to the shallow grooves like ink settling into parchment, revealing the colossal images. A spider with impossibly long legs, a hummingbird whose wings span the length of a modern football field, a monkey with a spiraled tail that curls with mathematical precision, and a human figure, arms raised, staring skyward, frozen in a gesture that appears both pleading and triumphant. The desert is alive with geometry. Trapezoids cut across the plains like runways. Long straight lines extend toward distant mountains. Spirals and intersecting angles form patterns so exact that they seem engineered rather than carved by hand. For the people who lived here, the Nazca civilization, this land was everything. It was their home, their sanctuary, and their challenge. Harsh, dry, and unforgiving, the desert demanded ingenuity for survival. Water was scarce, rain almost non-existent, and yet the Nazca flourished here for centuries. They engineered underground aqueducts known as puquillos, allowing them to draw water from deep beneath the earth. They mastered textiles, pottery, astronomy, and agricultural systems that defied the limitations of their environment. They were artists and engineers, dreamers and scientists, bound to the land but reaching for something beyond it.
And somewhere in the intersection of survival and spirituality, they carved their message into the desert floor. The creation of each geoglyph required planning, coordination, and labor on a scale rarely matched by ancient cultures. Workers removed the dark, oxidized stones from the desert surface to reveal the bright, pale soil beneath, carving lines that remained untouched for centuries thanks to the unique climate of the region. No rain, no erosion, no vegetation, just wind and silence. Their artwork became eternal almost by accident. Yet for all their technical skill and cultural depth, the Nazca left no written explanation for their creations. No inscriptions, no final testament, no carved stone detailing their purpose. Just shapes, lines, and figures. Thousands of them spread across a desert landscape roughly the size of Luxembourg. An entire civilization communicating through images whose meaning became lost to time. The first modern hint of the Nazca Lines' existence came only in the 16th century, when Spanish conquistadors rode across the plains and noticed faint trails beneath their horses' hooves. They assumed they were remnants of ancient roads, nothing more. For hundreds of years, the lines remained misunderstood, unappreciated, or simply ignored. It wasn't until the early 20th century, when airplanes began flying over southern Peru, that the truth was finally visible. Pilots looked down and saw enormous shapes sprawled across the earth like sketches drawn by giants.
Word spread quickly. Soon, archaeologists, adventurers, mystics, and scientists began arriving from around the world to witness the impossible artwork. How could a pre-industrial culture achieve such scale? Why did they do it? And how did they maintain such perfect symmetry across miles of terrain? Standing on the plateau today, the desert feels unchanged since the Nazca first carved into it. The heat waves shimmer on the horizon, distorting the edges of distant shapes. A condor circles overhead, its shadow briefly crossing the lines below, a reminder that the sky has always been the key to understanding this place. On the ground, the lines can be difficult to identify. Some appear faint, others blend into the earth. But from altitude, the desert becomes a canvas, the lines transforming into perfect figures with sharp edges and astonishing precision. It is as if the Earth itself has been inscribed with a cosmic message. Archaeologists began to study the lines in earnest during the 1930s and 40s, mapping the shapes, cataloging the figures, and measuring the distances. Among the most famous early researchers was a German mathematician and archaeologist named Maria Rieke, a woman whose life became synonymous with the desert she devoted herself to understanding. Arriving in Peru in the 1930s as a tutor, she soon fell in love with the mystery of the Nazca Lines and dedicated the next 5 decades of her life to uncovering their secrets. She walked the desert daily, often alone, armed with little more than a measuring tape, a compass, and a notebook. She cataloged hundreds of geoglyphs, calculating angles, comparing distances, and studying solar alignments. Her feet blistered, her skin burned, her eyes strained against the sun, but she pressed on, convinced that the lines represented a vast astronomical calendar, a prehistoric observatory tracked celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, star alignments, Rieke believed the Nazca had encoded their understanding of the sky directly into the Earth. Her theories were bold, and though some were dismissed by mainstream archaeologists, she became a guardian of the desert, personally defending the lines from encroaching development. But astronomy is only one theory. Others propose that the lines were ritual pathways, roads of the gods, used in ceremonial processions. The Nazca, they argue, walked these long, straight paths to honor deities responsible for water, fertility, and life. The desert was sacred to them, a realm between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. The geoglyphs may have served as offerings, visible to divine beings watching from above. Still others suggest that the lines were markers pointing toward underground water sources. This theory connects the geoglyphs to the puquios, the ancient aqueducts engineered with spiral entrances, strikingly similar to the spiral shapes seen in some geoglyphs. Perhaps the desert artwork mapped the resources essential for survival. More fringe theories claim the lines were created in communication with extraterrestrial visitors. Proponents point to the enormous size of the geoglyphs, the straight lines stretching for miles, and the figures that resemble modern runways or landing pads. Although unsupported by scientific evidence, this idea became popular in the 20th century due to writers like Erich von Däniken, who saw in the desert an incontrovertible sign of alien presence. Many dismissed such claims as pseudoscience, but the idea remains lodged in the public imagination. Then there is the theory that the lines represent a ritual landscape where shamans, under the influence of hallucinogenic plants, envisioned giant animals and cosmic forms, later translating their visions into physical form. Some anthropologists argue that the scale itself reflects spiritual transcendence, the idea that the artwork was meant for gods, not humans. Each hypothesis carries fragments of truth, but none explains everything. Why thousands of lines? Why so many shapes? Why such variety? Animals, geometric forms, humanoid figures? Why so many straight lines that have no apparent symbolic meaning? And why visible only from above when no such vantage point existed for the Nazca? Today, as one walks across the desert, the immensity of what the Nazca accomplished becomes overwhelming. The surface underfoot is made of darkened stones, oxidized by centuries of exposure. Moving them reveals the pale soil beneath, an inversion of color so stark that it creates natural contrast visible for miles. The desert's dryness preserves the lines perfectly. The removed stones never shift, and the exposed earth remains unchanged. Time, which erodes so much of human achievement, seems almost afraid to touch the Nazca Lines. A modern visitor might pick up a small stone, roll it in their palm, and sense the weight of centuries embedded within it. Every stone has likely remained in place for more than 1,000 years, unmoved except for the hands that placed it. There is something haunting about that, something intimate, as if touching the stones means touching the hands that touched them long ago. The silence stretches across the land, broken only by footsteps and the occasional whisper of wind. And then, from nowhere, a shape begins to form. The long curve of a wing, the sweep of a tail, a beak pointing toward the horizon. You are standing upon the outline of a bird so large it defies comprehension. And you realize that this was not made by a single person, but by a community. A collective mind driven by belief, purpose, or necessity powerful enough to carve their will into the earth. The desert becomes a record of intention, deliberate, intricate, mysterious. The desert reveals its secrets slowly, as if testing the patience of those who dare to interpret the silent marks left by the Nazca. As archaeologists ventured deeper into the plains during the mid-20th century, they discovered that the geoglyphs were far more numerous and diverse than first imagined. Some stretched for mere meters, others for over a kilometer. The animal figures, though iconic, represented only a fraction of the total engravings. Countless geometric shapes, triangles, trapezoids, spirals, zigzags, and impossibly straight lines dominated the landscape like strokes of a colossal brush. Some lines shot perfectly straight for dozens of kilometers, their precision so exact that even modern surveyors struggle to replicate them without advanced equipment. Researchers began to wonder how the Nazca achieved such impossible symmetry. Without metal tools, without modern surveying technology, and without the ability to view their creations from above, the Nazca civilization nonetheless produced perfectly straight alignments over uneven terrain. When archaeologists examined the ground closely, they found wooden stakes buried deep in the soil, ancient markers used for plotting lines, forming geometric grids, and marking angles. With ropes and simple surveying techniques, the Nazca had crafted a system that allowed them to measure vast distances with surprising accuracy. These stakes, still in place after more than 1,000 years, provided evidence that the Nazca were not improvising their designs. They were following complex plans. Yet, even with planning, the purpose remained elusive. When researchers traced the direction of certain lines, they discovered that many appeared to align with astronomical events: the sunrise during the winter solstice, the setting of specific stars, or the rotational paths of constellations. Some lines converged upon horizon points where celestial bodies rose or set. The desert, it seemed, served as a map, a calendar, or perhaps a cosmic observatory. But not all lines aligned with the heavens. Many pointed toward the slopes of the Andes, where ancient aquifers and water sources lay hidden. Others seemed to connect sacred sites used for rituals, forming networks that could only be understood when viewed as part of a greater landscape. The Nazca were a deeply spiritual culture. Their beliefs centered around forces of nature: water, fertility, mountains, and the earth itself. Living in a region with almost no rainfall, the Nazca saw water as divine. The puquios, their ingenious aqueducts, were carved into the earth in spirals that mirrored the spiral geoglyphs etched across the desert. This symmetry between engineering and symbolism suggested a worldview where practicality and spirituality intertwined seamlessly. The act of creating lines on the desert may have been more than artistic expression. It may have been a ritual itself.
Some archaeologists believe the Nazca walked these lines during ceremonies, following long paths that symbolized pilgrimages or spiritual journeys. A single line stretching across the land could represent a connection between the human world and the world of the gods. As participants walked the line, chanting and carrying offerings, they may have believed they were communicating with celestial forces. The shapes of animals, such as the hummingbird symbolizing fertility, or the condor symbolizing the heavens, or the spider associated with rain, were perhaps offerings in themselves, carved large enough for divine beings to witness from above.
The scale of these rituals must have been immense. Hundreds of people may have gathered for ceremonial processions, moving in unison across the desert, each step reaffirming their connection to forces that governed their survival. The desert floor, still echoing faint traces of their footsteps, feels like a stage where ancient performances once unfolded, performances whose meaning has faded but whose presence remains etched into the soul of the land. Yet, not all mysteries can be solved through archaeology alone. The Nazca Lines lie in a region prone to hallucinations induced by extreme heat and dehydration. Some anthropologists propose that shamans seeking transcendence consumed hallucinogenic plants such as San Pedro cactus. Under the influence of powerful visions, they might have witnessed giant animals or cosmic beings stretching across the desert in their minds. The creation of massive geoglyphs may have been an attempt to give physical form to these visions, a way of manifesting spiritual experiences into the physical world. Even today, local communities speak of the desert as a place between worlds, a liminal space where spirits wander and time behaves differently. Elders recount stories of ancestral beings who walked the plains before the arrival of the Spanish, leaving their marks in the earth as signs for future generations. These oral traditions, though fragmented, hint at a cultural memory that reaches back to a time when the desert was seen not as empty but as alive. Modern scientists, meanwhile, continue to explore the lines using drones, satellite imaging, and infrared photography. Every decade brings new discoveries: geoglyphs hidden beneath shifting sands, shapes obscured by erosion, symbols so faint they are invisible to the naked eye. Some newly discovered figures depict animals never seen in earlier catalogs: a killer whale, a cat, even a strange humanoid creature with exaggerated hands and eyes. Each new finding adds to the complexity of the puzzle. As researchers document more shapes, the possibility grows that the Nazca Lines formed a massive, interconnected system, an ancient tapestry of meaning woven across the desert, not random, not isolated, but unified. Standing upon one of the long straight lines, the horizon seems to stretch endlessly. The line itself feels like an arrow, pointing toward a distant truth. The desert hums with silence, yet speaks with symbols. And as one contemplates the vastness of the landscape, a profound realization emerges. The Nazca were communicating not with individuals, but with eternity. Their message was not meant for a moment, but for millennia. A message written into the earth itself. The sun lowers in the sky, casting long shadows that highlight the shallow trenches. As dusk approaches, the desert cools. Shapes once faint become visible again, illuminated by angled light that reveals contours and borders. It is in these fleeting moments, sunrise and sunset, that the lines speak most clearly. They come alive, interacting with light in a dance that has repeated for centuries. If one stands on a ridge overlooking the plains, watching the final rays of sunlight skim across the ground, the geoglyphs appear to pulse with life. The animals seem to move, the lines shimmer, the desert breathes. The Nazca may have understood this phenomenon intimately. Their world revolved around cycles, seasons, water, fertility, celestial rhythms. And so the desert itself may have served as a grand stage for the interplay of light and shadow, turning the geoglyphs into dynamic symbols visible only at certain times of day. The night descends quickly in the desert. Stars burst into view with a clarity rarely seen elsewhere. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a celestial river, its shimmering band mirrored by the pale lines etched into the desert below. Perhaps the Nazca saw a connection between sky and earth, believing that their sacred artwork was a reflection of the heavens. The desert floor, then, was not merely a canvas, it was a mirror, linking the mortal world with the divine. And in that connection, the purpose of the Nazca Lines becomes more than archaeological mystery. It becomes a testament to a civilization that sought to understand its place in the universe, a culture that etched its beliefs into the land so that future generations might one day discover, question, and wonder. As the decades progressed and technology advanced, the Nazca Lines continued to challenge researchers in ways no one anticipated. The discovery of new geoglyphs, hidden beneath shifting sands or obscured by centuries of erosion, revealed that the desert's secrets were far from fully uncovered. It became clear that the visible lines represented only a portion of what once existed. Some figures had faded beyond recognition, others lay fragmented, and some remained untouched, preserved like ancient signatures waiting patiently for rediscovery. Modern aerial surveys using LiDAR, light detection and ranging, transformed the study of the Nazca Lines. This technology allowed researchers to strip away visual noise and see beneath the layers of sand that had accumulated over hundreds of years. Suddenly, ghostly outlines emerged, new animals, previously unseen shapes, and geometric patterns that expanded the known catalog of Nazca imagery. Each new discovery shifted previous interpretations, forcing scientists to reconsider what they thought they understood. One of the most surprising revelations was the presence of humanoid figures that did not match the proportions or styles of typical Nazca art. Some appeared distorted, with elongated limbs or unusually large eyes. Others were highly abstract, resembling beings or symbols whose purpose defied explanation. One of the most surprising revelations was the presence of humanoid figures that did not match the proportions or styles of typical Nazca art. Some appeared distorted, with elongated limbs or unusually large eyes. Others were highly abstract, resembling beings or symbols whose purpose defied explanation. These figures raised questions about the belief systems of the Nazca people. Were these representations of deities, spirits, mythological figures, or were they symbolic references to stories long lost from historical memory? But the mysteries extended beyond artistic expression. For decades, researchers tried to determine how the Nazca civilization managed to survive in an environment that seemed almost impossible to inhabit. Rainfall in the region is nearly non-existent, and temperatures fluctuate drastically between scorching days and cold nights. Yet, the Nazca built thriving communities supported by agriculture, architecture, and intricate social systems. Their survival hinged upon their mastery of water. The puquios, ancient aqueducts that still function today, proved to be one of the civilization's greatest achievements. These underground channels, some extending deep into the earth, brought water from aquifers to the surface, feeding fields that produced crops essential for their survival. Ingeniously designed with spiral access points, the puquios allowed air to flow into the tunnels, maintaining pressure that pushed water through the system. The spirals, when viewed from above, bore striking resemblance to the spiral geoglyphs carved into the desert floor. This visual connection suggested something profound, that the Nazca incorporated their engineering knowledge into their symbolic landscape. The lines, then, were not only artistic, spiritual, or astronomical, they were educational. They were expressions of knowledge encoded into the environment, forming a landscape-sized manuscript conveying lessons about nature, survival, and the cosmos. As research deepened, it became increasingly clear that the Nazca Lines could not be explained by any single theory. Instead, they reflected multiple layers of meaning. Some lines aligned with astronomical events. Others pointed toward water sources, while still others appeared connected to ritual practices. The Nazca civilization embraced a worldview where spirituality, science, and daily life intertwined seamlessly. Their lines were not static. They were dynamic messages, shifting in meaning depending on the needs and beliefs of the people who created them. This multifaceted nature made the Nazca Lines both brilliant and enigmatic. Every explanation fit, yet none fit completely. Scholars found themselves navigating a labyrinth of interpretations, each theory offering a glimpse of the truth, but leaving a larger mystery unresolved. For the Nazca, perhaps ambiguity was intentional. Their messages were not meant to be understood quickly or easily. They were meant to outlast generations, to speak across centuries. The desert became a living archive, a place where human intention and natural forces coexisted. When standing among the lines today, it becomes impossible not to sense this interaction. The land feels ancient, wise, almost conscious. The silence is so profound that even the faintest breeze becomes noticeable. The texture of the desert floor crunches softly with each step. And far in the distance, the Andes rise like sentinels, eternal guardians watching over the plains. Travelers often report a strange feeling while exploring the Nazca Desert, something between awe and reverence. The sense that they are walking through a place not meant for ordinary human perception, a place designed to be seen by something greater, perhaps by gods, perhaps by the sky itself. As night returns, the desert transforms again. The stars glimmer with a clarity that cannot be found in cities or even most rural landscapes. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, a celestial river of light. And beneath it, the lines seem to glow faintly, as if answering the call of the heavens. For a moment, sky and earth appear connected, two halves of the same ancient story. In those moments, the mystery of the Nazca Lines becomes more than an academic question. It becomes an emotional experience, a reminder of humanity's enduring desire to leave a mark, to communicate beyond the limits of time, to express wonder, belief, and curiosity in ways that transcend spoken language. The Nazca may not have known that experts in the far future would analyze their creations. They may not have imagined airplanes, satellites, or global audiences, but they must have known that their work would endure. They crafted messages not for themselves, but for the future, for anyone willing to stand in the desert, confront its silence, and search for meaning. The lines challenge us because they were never meant to be simple. Their purpose was not convenience, but depth. The Nazca invited the world to think, to question, and to see beyond the obvious. And in that invitation lies the true power of their legacy.
As the modern world surged forward, the Nazca Lines remained frozen in time, preserved by the same climate that once allowed them to be created. But while the lines themselves stayed unchanged, everything around them transformed rapidly. Roads expanded, tourism accelerated, and satellite images made the mysterious shapes known to millions. What was once a hidden desert secret became a global phenomenon. Yet increased attention brought new challenges. The heavy pressure of tourism risked damaging the fragile surface. Vehicles strayed off designated paths. Some visitors, unaware of the extreme sensitivity of the desert crust, walked across the lines and unintentionally disturbed stones that had remained unmoved since ancient times. Even natural phenomena posed risks. Rare but powerful flash floods, caused by distant mountain storms, threatened to disrupt the edges of certain geoglyphs. Recognizing the danger, Peru declared the Nazca Lines a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1994. This designation helped protect the desert through strict regulation, controlled visitation, and the monitoring of vulnerable areas. Conservation efforts increased, with archaeologists and government agencies working side by side to ensure that the lines would survive, not just as relics, but as symbols of human ingenuity. But despite efforts to preserve the past, the desert continued to reveal new traces of the Nazca civilization. In recent years, drone surveys uncovered more than 100 previously unknown geoglyphs, figures so faint that they were invisible to the naked eye. Some depicted warriors, some animals, some abstract forms that defied classification. These discoveries deepened the mystery once more. Each new image challenged existing theories, suggesting that the Nazca world was even richer, more complex, and more symbolic than anyone had imagined. As researchers examined these new shapes, one truth became increasingly apparent. The Nazca Lines were not isolated creations made by a solitary group. They represented generations of tradition, knowledge, and cultural practice. The lines formed a living timeline, a record stretching across centuries. Some geoglyphs were older, others newer, each layer representing a chapter in the evolving story of the Nazca people. This layered history implied that the meaning of the lines may have changed over time. What began as ritual paths could later have become astronomical markers. What once represented myths could eventually have been repurposed as symbols of water or fertility.
The desert, in this sense, became a palimpsest, a surface rewritten again and again by different generations. And yet, through all these transformations, a core idea remained. The Nazca believed in communicating through scale. Their messages were meant to be monumental, transcending ordinary human perception. They created symbols not for individuals, but for beings who could see the world from above. Whether those beings were deities, ancestors, or celestial watchers remains uncertain, but the intention was clear. The Nazca reached upward, beyond their own world. This idea resonates strongly today. In an era defined by satellites, drones, and global communication, the Nazca Lines feel strangely modern. We too broadcast messages that can only be seen from above. Megacities glowing at night, highways cutting across continents, fields arranged in geometric grids. From space, the traces of modern humanity form patterns just as mysterious as the Nazca Lines must have seemed to early pilots. The desert's message, then, becomes universal. It reminds us that human beings, regardless of era, seek to be remembered. We carve meaning into the world around us. We leave marks, intentional or not, that future generations will interpret in their own way. The Nazca Lines are not merely artifacts of a vanished civilization. They are reflections of a shared human desire to communicate across time.
Standing on the plateau today, as the sun rises and casts soft golden light across the plains, the lines appear almost alive. Their edges glow faintly, their shapes expanding and contracting with shifting shadows. The spider stretches its legs across the desert floor. The hummingbird points toward the horizon. The monkey curls its tail into a perfect spiral. And the long, straight lines, so impossibly precise, extend like arrows into distant mountains. In these quiet moments, the Nazca Lines evoke a sense of connection. One can almost hear the faint echoes of ancient footsteps, feel the presence of those who once walked these paths with reverence. The desert becomes a bridge between worlds, past and present, earth and sky, humanity and the unknown. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Nazca Lines is not why they were made, but how they continue to evoke wonder. After centuries of research, we still stand in awe, our minds filled with questions. And maybe that is precisely what the Nazca intended. They invited us into their desert not to solve a puzzle, but to experience a feeling, one of humility, curiosity, and reverence for a world larger than ourselves. As the final light of day fades and the desert prepares for night, the lines settle back into darkness. The sky fills with stars once more, forming constellations that echo the shapes below. For a brief moment, sky and earth merge into one. And in that moment, the legacy of the Nazca endures, not as an answer, but as an eternal question written across the land. A question that whispers through the ages. Who were we? What did we believe? And what traces will we leave behind? The Nazca Desert stretches silently as the sun dips toward the horizon. For centuries, these monumental lines have survived wind, sand, and time itself, unchanged yet speaking across generations. They are more than art. They are messages carved into the earth, meant to be seen from above, meant to inspire awe and reflection. From the hummingbird to the monkey, from the spider to the enigmatic humanoid figures, each geoglyph is a bridge between humanity and the cosmos. Scholars debate their meaning, astronomical calendars, sacred pathways, offerings to the gods. But perhaps the true power lies not in answers, but in the questions they leave behind. Standing among the lines, one feels the presence of those who walked here long ago. Their knowledge, their faith, their imagination, etched across miles of desert, invites us to look upward and beyond ourselves. In a world measured by technology and data, the Nazca Lines remind us that some messages are timeless, meant to awaken curiosity and wonder. As the stars emerge above, mirrored by the pale desert below, the lines seem alive once more. They speak not to be solved, but to be felt, to be seen, to remind us that human beings across all ages seek to leave traces of their existence,
to communicate with forces greater than themselves, and to reach toward eternity. And as we leave the desert behind, the final truth is clear. The Nazca Lines are not just mysteries, they are invitations. Invitations to question, to imagine, and to connect with the world in ways that last far beyond a single lifetime.